We'll just get nestled in here. Catherine? Yep, you go. All right. How are you all doing? Yeah. So I'm just going to let you know, this is my first Steward Ownership Conference, and it's pretty special, right? Some of you have been here before. It's my first time. Lots of others of you are here for the first time. But it really is quite incredible to witness what is happening here today with all of you. And I think the reason is, we heard this as well earlier, taking the path less trodden isn't easy. It takes curiosity, and it takes energy, a lot of energy, and it takes courage. And here we are, here you are, 500 people more or less, and you're taking time to really give deep thought to what businesses are here to do and what purpose they play in our societies. And that is very, very inspiring. So this panel we come on to is titled Building Resilience and Innovation in an Age of Concentration. And we're going to take a deep dive and have a look at in fact, a step back and look at the big picture of this very interwoven world that we live in and see what is the status quo of business today. And at a time where we are seeing real economic concentration, which brings with it certain threats, if we name it directly. And we want to then also look at what the alternative ownership models have as a role to play, and in fact bringing about ways of creating more resilience, creating long-term thinking that leads to innovation, healthy working environments that we can really feel proud of. And I think that's something else that's really struck me, is the conversations that we're having are about business with feelings and with emotions. And of course, that's where our values sit. They sit in the connection to these deeper feelings. And we're going to have a conversation with 4 absolutely wonderful people who have, I think, a great ability for this deep thinking. So I will introduce you, and this is a short introduction and by no means does justice to all of the fantastic work that you have been doing across your careers so far. First off, we have Catherine Bracey. She is the CEO and founder of Tech Equity, and she's the author of the book World Eaters: How Venture Capital is Cannibalizing the Economy. The book's at the front. I don't know, some lucky people might have got a copy already. And in this book, she examines the concentration of corporate power with a particular lens on the tech sector and how this shapes inequality and our civic life. Then we have Juho Makkonen. He is the co-founder of ShareTribe, a steward-owned company that builds software to help founders create online marketplaces. And ShareTribe always set out from the word go with a vision and a mission to democratize platform ownership and really empower non-technical founders, of which there's quite a few of us, who are often bootstrapping, to follow their dreams and launch their own marketplaces. Then we have Pauline van Keulen. She is the organizational lead of Voice, a Dutch business communication provider operating here in Europe and South Africa. And she brings first-hand experience of leading this transition into steward ownership in what for Voice was a story of succession. And last but not least, we have Dr. Professor Nyan-Ha Sher. He is a professor at Harvard Business School, and leading the course titled Leadership, Ethics and Corporate Accountability, and is also the co-founder of the Ownership Project, which some of you might have heard a little bit about before in one of the workshops. And the Ownership Project investigates how multi-stakeholder approaches and different ownership models influence corporate purpose, and that in turn influences our economies and our society. So, let's hear from you. We want to know what lens you view ownership and the role that it plays in the wider economy. And I think we'll come first to you, Nhan Ha. You have obviously done real deep research into the field of purpose and responsibility of business. And you initiated the Ownership Project as a result last year. So tell us, why ownership?
No, it's a great question. We get it a lot. I think one way to motivate the idea of ownership in the business school context is to talk about how, I think in the business school discussion, we've sort of reached the end in terms of talking about stakeholder theory. Because at the end of the day, stakeholder theory only gets you so far unless you actually think about how the enterprise is itself owned and structured in terms of governance and also in terms of who benefits from it. But to be honest, if I sort of really think about what motivated us starting the Ownership Project, I think it's really actually in some sense to be true to our mission and purpose as a business school. Because ownership is central to business and capitalism, and yet the kinds of structures we talk about in the context of business schools regarding ownership of capital, enterprises, resources more generally, is actually quite narrow, right? And if we are to be true to our mission as a business school, we should actually be quite critical and creative in thinking about the whole range of ways in which we can think about structuring ownership. And so for me, the Ownership Project really is in some sense trying to further the mission of the business school by getting people to think critically and creatively about how we ought to think about ownership.
Yeah, beautiful. Let's come to you next, Pauline. You have obviously, as we mentioned, led this transition for Voice quite recently. How and when, as an organizational lead group, did you realize that the ownership model of the company was actually going to be important for its continued story?
Well, I think ownership, or the concept of ownership, was always a part of the story. Voice was started 20 years ago, and it was a very conscious decision to never have investors, which is a very ownership-driven decision to not have investors on board. And Voice grew into a company that had we have a very specific thinking on how we think people should work there. We want to work on equality in the world. We have a bigger mission than just being a successful company, which feels very natural to us, but it was also based on the intrinsic motivation of the shareholders in their concept of what shareholding was. And that's both very sturdy and very fragile, because it exists with them being there. And they will not be there forever, and they were also being held prisoner in their own company. So then we needed to start thinking about ownership, which always came from their feeling of what ownership is, and we needed to pour that into a structure that emulated that feeling and that principle and that moral vision of what ownership in a company is into a structure that could exist beyond them.
Yeah, wonderful. Let's come to you next, Juho. You have at ShareTribe always put democracy at the heart of what you're doing, and you're doing this in your service offering with the marketplaces, but also in your business model, right? So why is ownership relevant to you as a founder, and where does your interest lie in the thinking behind, or the rethinking, let's say, of ownership and finance structures?
Yeah, so, well, we are working in this field of the so-called sharing economy. That's where we started from. Like, our concept is that we help entrepreneurs to create their own platforms, a bit like Etsy or a bit like Airbnb and a bit like Uber. And when we started, we really felt that, okay, this so-called sharing economy, this is purely a positive force for the world. Like, what could be better? Like, idle assets are being put to more efficient use, more human-faced economy, at the same way, new ways for people to make money or make the ends meet. And then at some point, we started realizing that actually there's a slew of problems that come with these giant platforms, like growing even bigger and extracting even more and more value. And we started feeling that, is this actually like a net negative impact that these platforms are having in the world? And we really started seeing that this comes down to how those platforms are owned. And it actually became our mission already before our steward ownership transition to democratize platform ownership specifically. And the word ownership there was really important because we saw that this is really the only way. We need to basically help people to vote with their feet. So if they are not happy with the rules of the giant platforms, they should just go and create their own platforms that have they own themselves and govern themselves. And that's would be the root of all that. And then the problem for us was that when we went to conferences and events and we talked to activists and we told about this mission, and they were like, okay, but what prevents you from becoming one of them? And at the time, we had a venture capital investor ourselves. We had a traditional startup structure, and there was no going around that. We didn't have a good answer to them. And we were like, oh, we are good guys. We would never do that. That just wasn't like a very credible answer. And we were really struggling with that. And we knew that, okay, we need one more financing round ourselves to get to where we want to go. And that is when we discovered steward ownership. And that really then came like, okay, this is the thing that is missing. This is the missing piece that allows us to actually make this binding promise to all the stakeholders. We won't become one of them. We won't sell out. We will all never prioritize profit making over our purpose. So that decision was the best decision we've ever made.
Oh, lovely. Yay! And I think we've learned to become a little bit skeptical of the good guys, but I know we've got a lot of good guys and gals, and many people are here in the room. So, Catherine, on to you. You obviously have written your book last year, which you definitely should read and grab a copy. You obviously had spoken to a lot of people in the research for that. How do you see the interplay between, because you really delved into the finance structures, ownership and finance?
Yeah, I came at this kind of from the other direction, which was as an advocate for technology that works for people instead of against people, and started thinking about, as I was working on these issues really on the ground, so how technology was impacting workers or affecting the housing market, things like that, and how they show up in real people's lives, and why it seemed like the tech industry was growing away from its original promise to be this democratizing force for opportunity and towards something much darker and uglier. And the forces feeling like they were so much stronger. I started asking, what was going on here, and actually, sort of embarrassingly, since I've been working on this issue for 20 plus years now, really started to understand over the last 5 how much the financial system around the tech industry is really driving the behavior on the ground, the impacts for real people. And as I was thinking about not just learning about how those structures create these incentives that entrepreneurs are forced to respond to, also thinking about what might something different look like, and that's where I found Purpose Foundation, and really started thinking about governance structures as maybe an antidote to venture capital. And I think I'm a little bit more critical of that view now. When I wrote the book, and you'll see if you picked up a copy, there's a section on OpenAI, and I sort of hold OpenAI up as an example of how you can structure a tech company, the governance structure of a tech company to protect the technology from investors, and that is in the process of being dismantled as we speak. So investors really run the show there. So, and I interviewed Sam Altman for that part of the book, and at the time he told me that he thought the governance structure was bulletproof, and there was really, they set it up to protect the technology from investors, and they thought it would be extremely difficult to dismantle. And it just goes to show how powerful the forces of capital are. And as much as I think it is promising, it's very inspiring to be in a room of people who are really trying to make this real in the world. It does speak to how much the systems really need to change in order to support the growth of alternative models.
Yeah, very good point. Okay. So we obviously mentioned at the beginning, we are in a time where our global economy, that is all very interconnected, really faces growing concentration of ownership. And we've got the likes of venture capital really dominating and shaping the startup scene, and then we've got private equity and large corporations buying up lots of independent organizations. And we want to now talk about where that path takes us. So let's have that discussion of the observations that you're seeing in your work, in the realms that you're moving in. Where is this track taking us? What is happening? And are there specific risks that you believe we need to be aware of? And I think I'll maybe come back, kind of throw the ball in your direction, if I may, Nhan Ha.
So in terms of, I don't think I need to tell people what the effects are with regard to the concentration of ownership in the corporate space. I think all of us are aware in some sense of that. I guess what I think is helpful to think a little bit about is not just the immediate impact that it has, whether it's on consumers or users of technology or communities or workers, but there's a deeper sense in which the kind of concentration we're talking about allows businesses to, in some sense, shape our future, right? Because the investment decisions that are being made by businesses and investors will shape the way the future evolves, and we've sort of seen some of that impact already. And so what we're really talking about, I think, is a question of what kind of a future do we want to have as a society and as a world, and to have that kind of input into that future, what needs to change with regard to that? So I think for me, that's kind of the question, sort of thinking about that. I mean, obviously there's immediate impact we should sort of worry about, and this isn't to say they're all bad. I mean, certainly a lot of technologies and things couldn't have been developed without, right, this degree of capital investment as well. But I think it's just to keep in mind that what's really happening is at some level, it's about shaping the future that we are going to live in, and do we all want to be part of sort of helping to direct that?
Yeah, lovely. And I mean, let's have the discussion. What's sparking with yourselves?
Yeah, at least like for us, well, I already spoke a bit about this, that what we were definitely seeing these examples in our own field. So if I take like if I name like specific examples of like what we've been seeing. So if you take something like Airbnb, so to me that is like a really good example. So where we have really like quite idealistic founders there. You know, they want to solve a problem in the world, and they were very, and this was like, what they really spoke about is that, okay, there are all these apartments out there that are half used, or they are like spare rooms, they are spare apartments, or they are spare beds, and let's just put these to better use, so we actually need to create less hotels, and we need to create less apartments, like, so idle assets to better use. And then, so that was like an original noble mission. And then when you enter lots of venture capital into the mix, what ends up happening is the current reality where actually like lots of people are being pushed into living in the suburbs because like landlords are turning their rental apartments into vacation rentals, which are actually half empty. So it's exactly opposite of the original mission. And this is a pattern that I've seen happen so many times. So, you know, the company starts from like the genuine interest by the founders to solve a problem. And then at some point, you create a structure that ends up this such powerful force that just forces you to profit, like prioritize profit, that then you, at some point, actually the purpose and profit, which you originally thought that, okay, they are in perfect harmony, just more profit we make, also bigger impact we make. And at some point, it becomes this moment where these two are in conflict. And then if you have chosen the wrong structure, in my view, then that means that you cannot make that decision. You have to choose profits. I actually heard this rumor, so there's a rumor, but this comes from a source very close to the Airbnb founders, that there was a moment where the founders actually went to the board and said, look, we want to evict the landlords, like the professional landlords from the platform. We want to bring it back to the roots. And the board said, sorry, no, this is not your company anymore. And like we were seeing like some signs of this like ourselves also, like our original investors, they were really nice people, but still they were driven by the venture capital logic, and they when there was a moment where our business wasn't growing as fast as they hoped. And they said that, okay, you are focusing on this like founders and entrepreneurs who have very little money and they are, and because you could grow so much faster if you just actually start selling to large enterprises who are looking to turn their retail e-commerce operations into marketplaces. And well, today there is a big company that is a unicorn company focusing on that. So we could have been that company and we could have made a lot of money. Would we be making a positive impact in the world? Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't think so. And that we were still in that position to be able to say, okay, actually, we don't want that. That is not our purpose. And I feel that this is what this is all about. You want to create a structure that always allows you to say, no, this is not the direction we are going to be taking, even if that would mean less profit for the company.
Yeah, I mean, venture capital is designed to create monopolies. The blitz scaling mentality is really toxic, and not just because of the types of companies that it enables and the harms that come, from companies like Airbnb choosing the hyperscaling path, but also because of the companies and ideas that don't get funded. And actually, that's really what my book became about. I started thinking I would write a book about, the WeWorks and the Jewels and the, FTXs of the world. And it really became a book about, founders who tried to build something that the world needed and finding that they could not get capital to build that solution, even though there was a viable business model there. And we'll never really know how much we've lost because we didn't innovate on the financial system itself, right? We've just been, I think, venture capital. The irony of Silicon Valley is that it's a place that really rewards people who think outside the box, except when it comes to thinking about how to innovate on venture capital itself. And there's been almost no innovation on the business model of venture capital itself over the last 15 years. I think it's time. And I think this is actually maybe, for the silver lining of the moment we're living in, that there may be an opening with limited partners and governments to think through what might something else look like and how might we move capital into different types of models in a way that is much more sustainable and also, supports innovation and competition in a way that I think will be healthy for the economy going forward.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think let's jump to you. We're hearing, obviously, there about the frameworks and the models and the structures that we have are preventing really brilliant, meaningful, impactful, necessary ideas and innovations for society to come into play. But then there's also this other side of things where we look at existing businesses who are really, they've invested their life into building companies that they really feel proud of. They are based on a foundation of values, and then they need to think about continuity and succession. And I wonder.
Yeah, I think looking from that perspective, I think a lot of founders, the vast majority, start with a purpose. Whether you want to be a social enterprise or not, you start with a purpose. You have an idea, you want to solve a problem. And if you make it through your startup phase and you are a mid-sized company and you're thriving and you're doing really well and you see your dream is living and it's solving problems and it's working, then you face the fact that you won't be there forever, you won't live forever, or you don't want to be the owner of the company forever. And then that's from the perspective of Voice, then you are kind of stuck because you are left with the option of either selling the company and then giving away everything you dreamed of and hoping that the next owner will feel the same about it, but you have no control over it anymore, or leave it to your children. In the case of Voice, both the owners were very clear that they did not want that, so that was off the table, but selling was also not an option. So we were stuck in thinking, okay, how do we then do this? And fortunately for us, there was a law in effect for a year that we were able to jump through that hoop and become steward-owned. But before that law was there, it was a continuous conversation for us for years before becoming steward-owned. We see this coming towards us, this inevitable future of the owners not being there anymore, but we don't know how to solve it. Yeah. And I think that's a big challenge also for entrepreneurs sitting here on how do I safeguard what I built without me having to be there.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess. Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I guess to your original point, Charlotte, I guess I'd want to distinguish between sort of concentration of ownership and then also sort of the ways in which businesses are funded and owned, if that makes sense. So like venture capital, did arise to fill a certain kind of need at the time, right? So, tech entrepreneurs and scientists weren't able to get funding from regular investors at the time to be able to launch their mission. So it did serve a particular function at a moment in time. I think what we're looking at is maybe the question is, okay, so, but now that it's become sort of concentrated in a certain kind of model, that's sort of the issue, I think, if that makes sense. And so we need to think about sort of a plurality of forms. And so just sort of to say that we have to find the right kind of capital forms of investment that are needed now for a new kind of age, if that makes sense. So that's at least sort of my thought on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that the problem with venture capital is not venture capital, it's that it has become the only option, right? And that's why I called the book World Leaders, because it has crept into all these corners of the economy that it doesn't need to be in, and chasing returns, and that has crowded out any other type of financing, and has made, I think, investors really lazy, because they can just raise a VC fund, take 2% off the top, and not have to really do anything else. The money's just been so easy to come by. So that's why I also think there's a moment now, an opportunity. I think many investors have desperately jumped on the lifeboat that is AI, but I think, in a sustainable way, like under the surface, maybe what we can do is start to think through like what are real models that could access this other type of asset class that is like really innovative, risky companies that do not have hyperscale potential, but are still really important for the economy.
Yeah. So I think, obviously, we're starting to kind of move into the direction as well now. The systems that we have brought in, these are human-made systems, right? And we, as I'm going to say species, we're pretty clever at seeing the needs of the time. I know you write about that in the book. In the 60s and the 70s, venture capital was really necessary. But the times now are different. And so we want to, I guess, shine a light on, well, what do we need now? And using these very wise minds of ours, what do we need to then open up the path to? And there are, of course, additional options. And I think it's important to make the case. This isn't about entirely out with the old and in with something absolutely different and new. These different models, they can coincide. And I think that's where the sweet spot is, right? If we are able to provide alternatives that widen our markets and bring this playing field for different types, sizes, styles of business to really come into the world and not just survive, but thrive, then surely we're on to something really, really good, right? Because the number of companies we can have in this world isn't, in fact, limited. We can bring and make space for all of the good stuff. So let's talk now about that. If we zoom back out and we say, what good bits do we want to take, and how can we strengthen our economies with these different ownership models? What are the compelling alternatives out there, and what are you excited about? And what do we think that really entrepreneurs, politicians, policymakers, economists need to be aware of to bring these new models to the forefront? And I'm seeing lots of nodding heads. Who's going to go first?
Who wants to start?
Yeah, so at least from like an entrepreneur perspective, like when I remember when I was at this incubator program when we were starting like our startup journey, and it really felt like I have to echo like Catherine, like the problem with the startup ecosystem, it really feels that there's just one way to succeed. You go big or go home. Like that is the narrative. Like you need to strive to become a unicorn. There's no really other alternative and path, and that is the the definition of success is that you make an exit. And like, it really took some time and thinking to realize that there are as many definitions of success as there are people. And to me, I feel that the biggest lesson, in my opinion, for entrepreneurs is that you really want to put some thought and effort in thinking about like, what is your own personal definition of success? What is the thing that you want to like get out of life? And like, what does it really mean for you to feel that, okay, I have succeeded? And then you can design the structure of your organization around that definition. And I think that will lead to a plurality of like structures, maybe as many structures as there are people. And that is the beauty of structures like steward ownership, that it is not just like one answer. It is not like venture capital. It is more like, okay, it is a tool and model and approach that allows everybody to design their own ideal, perfect structure. And that is what speaks to me the most about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think we also, across all the stakeholders you mentioned, there's also a need for a shift in perspective. Because the question I got a lot when we were transitioning to steward ownership was, oh, so you're a charity now? And so I kind of thought, well, how do people reach this conclusion? But it was, you don't have shareholders anymore, therefore you don't have anybody who cares about profit anymore, therefore you are not making profit anymore, therefore you are a charity. Which is not true. Voice is still a company that's based on profit. We sell a product, we need to be successful, so we care about making a profit. But there's this assumption in there that as long as you have shareholders who work on maximizing that profit, you're going to be a successful business. Whereas it's the other way around, a good purpose and a drive to solve that problem in a profitable way, like Colin Meyer said this morning, that's what brings the success. But because this prevailing perception is there, I think that then you also get the things that we hear a lot today. It's swimming against the current, it's the pioneers, it's the brave entrepreneurs who are taking this route. I think that's also partly because of this reigning perception. So we need to change that, and then it will also become easier to take an alternative path.
Yeah. There's a lot of appreciation for what's being said up here, so let's carry on. Who wants to come in next?
Do you have any thoughts, Catherine? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree that a lot of the solution here, the opportunities for solutions, are just a mindset shift. It's just people thinking differently, and that's actually harder than it sounds. But, you know, and I think, again, this moment, you know, the key player here are limited partners, and I think they are realizing that they're not getting out of VC what they were promised they were going to get out of VC, traditional VC. And actually, you know, I think I read recently that European VC funds have performed better and are recovering faster than Silicon Valley funds. You know, in part because they took a more reasonable approach to their investments, right? They raised smaller funds. They, you know, were taking bets on real companies that had real fundamentals, and maybe there's a lesson in there that we can build on. But I also think about policy a lot, so I've been thinking about what governments can do, and you know, and from the perspective of political power, and I would say, you know, the concentration of money, wealth, is not just economic power that driven by VC. It's not just economic power, it is political power, and we're seeing that very clearly in the States right now. So I think for governments who want to protect democracy, it's really important to think about how you protect a vibrant, diverse, competitive economic ecosystem so that these, you know, few handful of companies or owners don't hold all the political power. And I think there are a variety of ways that you can do that. I mean, I think it would be interesting to look at you know, the European model for VC funds, why they have performed better than Silicon Valley over the last several years, and whether there are ways to improve on that to encourage limited partners to see different return model structures as actually an added benefit to their portfolios. Not to necessarily divest from the Sequoias of the world, but, you know, maybe put a little bit more capital into people who are doing it differently, maybe some version of revenue-based financing. It doesn't have to be, I think, you know, similar to Pauline, what you were saying about being seen as a charity. when I describe what I'm talking about to people, they're like, "Oh, it's social impact investing," and it's not. That's not at all what I mean. And in fact, I think it's in many ways the opposite of social impact investing. But it's just looking at, realizing the actual market opportunity that companies that grow, have smaller ceilings, lower ceilings, can produce, and maximizing the potential of those companies.
Yeah, and I love the point that you make about a lot of it is a thought, a mind shift change that needs to happen, because we tend often to really think in boxes. We limit ourselves, and then we create these limiting systems. So let's come as well to you with the research you've done. What excites you?
So it sounds strange, but I think what excites me is death.
I'll wait for it.
And what I mean is this, okay, so we've been talking about the need for mind shift change. We're talking about sort of, understanding your values and sort of trying to understand what kind of a firm you want. Are there different ways to sort of think about investors? But right now in the United States, small businesses, which are 500 employees or under, account for about maybe 23% of the GDP, but they employ half of the employees in the United States. So that's 30 million people. And half of these small businesses, there are about 3 million of them, are owned by people who are over the age of 55 and getting ready to retire. And so there'll be a huge shift at that moment, because only 15 to 30% of businesses historically have been passed on successfully to the next generation. And so one thing that my colleagues and I have been talking with people about is, we have a piece on this, is like, well, one way to be clear on your values is to ask people to think about what kind of legacy do they want to leave, right? I mean, why should it matter how people think about you after you die? You're dead, but your legacy matters, right? And so how people can think about that in terms of the continuity of the company, where it might be sold to. And it's not just sort of steward ownership. There are lots of different ways you could think about it, but I think actually taking that moment to sort of think about, what do you want your legacy to be, right? After you're gone, what do you want to leave behind? I actually think that might be a powerful way just to sort of kind of get us to do an individual mindset, because it is a very different way of thinking. Yeah. And so I'm half joking, but I'm sorry, that was a terrible joke about being excited about death. But I do think that is a moment to sort of try to think about that kind of mindset shift. And we are at a moment, at least in the United States and other parts of the world, my understanding is also similar here in Germany, that we're facing this big moment where there'll be a whole generational shift. And maybe with that generational shift, if we can get people to understand the other alternatives that are out there for thinking about it, that might be a way to sort of move things forward as well, in addition to the things that people have said.
Yeah. And I think, with this, as you say, the generational shift, what is to come, there's two ways of looking at it, On the one hand, what certainly excites me about business today is we are way more able to speak about, these feelings and why we actually set out to do what we did with the businesses that we've formed, and what we really want to leave them doing in the world once we're gone. And that's a thought process that's lovely, because it's values-based. At the same time, what's really important and should be for policymakers and nations is, okay, these companies that are typically then the smaller, mid-sized companies, they really do, in so many nations, form the backbone of our economic markets. We often forget, because we're, distracted by the sparkly unicorns that there are very few of, because they're unicorns, right? And so if our nations and leaders and the policymakers can be thinking about, well, hang on, there's all of the will in the world to have these companies continuing on doing things values-based and keeping our economies thriving, surely that's a win-win. These are exciting conversations to be having.
And that also speaks to the concentration of capital, right? Because the more we can continue these small, medium-sized companies, that also then still will address, at least at some level, right, the concentration of capital and the way in which that goes forward too. So
yeah. Wonderful. I'm going to ask you, we're not going to have time for Q&A, but I wonder if there's any one last thought that you want to leave people here in the room with in relation to ownership. It's a wide open space for you, but what comes to mind following this conversation?
Well, I'm very inspired when I hear personal stories from entrepreneurs who are doing this. I think it's really brave and takes a lot of courage to push against what are very strong headwinds and forge a different path. But I want to make sure that, I would encourage those of you who are thinking about your own personal journey in this to think about not just the personal nature of the structure that you're building, but also how that fits into a broader political and systemic story, and think about power dynamics and how power is shaped and what it means for you to live within this system that is not just, you are not building this company in a vacuum. You are not investing in a vacuum. You are building within a system, and it's incumbent on you not just to use your power to build an example through your company of what better can look like, but also to use your political power to push for a society that can support this model at scale.
Yeah, lovely. Do we have maybe one quick liners from each of you before we wrap up?
Yeah, so, I have two quick messages. First one goes to entrepreneurs. I think the fact that I've met already during this conference so many of you who are demonstrating that it is possible today to show you don't have to follow the dominant narrative. It's possible to hack the systems that we have today. It's possible to create this type of organizations today. So if you really want it, you can do it. Just define your own version of success and go for that. At the same time, I know that we have some politicians coming after this, so maybe the message to them goes that still, at the same time, if we want to see this at scale, examples like Voice demonstrate that still it is too difficult. Our legislative system isn't completely designed for this type of plurality. We want some serious change there too. And for there, I do look for our policymakers that hopefully they will be able to affect that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, my call would also be policymakers, legalize. We really need legal structures in place to make this easier.
Do I get the last? Death, you can't take it with you. I think, if I think about the idea of steward ownership, I think what it really calls to mind is we need to think once again about the responsibilities that come with ownership. Because steward ownership is about taking care of something, and we don't think of ownership in that same way anymore. And so what I would really love for us to do is just sort of think about the idea of what are the responsibilities of ownership, and what does it mean to sort of take care of something. I think that, for me, is something that's coming through this whole time here.
Wonderful. So, thank you to all of you for being here, for giving your time, your thoughts. Thank you to our wonderful panel. And let's just take this with us. There's room for many people to play in these markets. We live in a world of abundance. Let's embrace that, right?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.